Time to talk about a timeless classic again, The Third Man. Let's jump into it. Hi, my name's Drew and welcome to another review video on Flying Wiener. We are talking about one of the all-time classics, The Third Man, which came out in 1949. Now, I have obviously known about this film. It is set in Vienna, so as a person living in Vienna all my life, it's obviously something that has a very, very different feeling for me. You know, it's on a different level. I came to watching this because my brother and my mother, they had an agreement where she would watch Tenet with us, and in exchange for that, we would watch The Third Man with her. Obviously, it wasn't really quite a difficult negotiation because they're two very good films. She enjoyed Tenet quite a lot, despite all the mind-bendiness of it. If you're interested in that film, I did a review back when it came out in 2020. I'll leave a link to that at the end of this video. And we enjoyed The Third Man. Now, we're talking about it now, and I do actually have some nitpicks. It is very difficult to be critical of it because while I try, it's obviously very difficult to put myself into the shoes of a person living in 1949, you know, when this film came out. So obviously I have been influenced by today's standards and today's films. I don't mean by that it feels dated, but they're just things that didn't work for me. We'll get to them eventually. I do enjoy talking about some really classical films. I have done a few for the channel. Obviously, The Third Man is mentioned a lot when you talk about Orson Welles, and I have done Citizen Kane, for instance, in the past, about a year ago, I think, and I'll leave a link to that at the end of this video as well. But we'll start with the story as per usual, just in case you haven't seen The Third Man. You know, it was the first time for me as well. I kind of had an idea of what it was about, and it was a bit different actually. I thought it was this kind of spy movie type thing because I had heard of it in those kind of contexts, which strangely enough was just 2 weeks ago or so. I had heard an actual reference to the film where it was about spies, so I thought, you know, it was an actual spy film. That's not quite the case. It has got sort of thriller type elements to the story, and it feels like a spy story at times, but it isn't outright a spy story. But what happens is we follow a man from America. His character's name is Holly Martins. He comes to Vienna to visit his friend Harry Lime, played by Orson Welles, only to discover, unfortunately, that his friend has died. So right at the start of the film, you know, we've got very strange circumstances. He tries to figure out what exactly happened to him, and we follow him along as he's walking through Vienna, talking to various people, and develops particularly a very big fondness of a woman that was involved with Harry Lime. And so we follow the story from there. I won't exactly explain what happens, but that is the gist of it. So it is a kind of sort of a detective story in that sense. You know, we're trying to figure out something that's happened to someone, and there's a lot of dialogue, you know, and relationships going on. You're paying attention to how characters feel about each other and how they react to certain things. And yes, and that is what the story is about. What makes it very interesting, particularly for me as a person living in Vienna, is the setting, because it's not being sugar-coated in any way. We are seeing a lot of post-Second World War Vienna. So you see a lot of rubble, you see a lot of destroyed buildings, which for me, of course, is a very, very bizarre experience, as you can imagine, because I know a lot of these places because I've been there. I mean, they're in the city centre. I'm not in the city centre that often. They're more touristy places, of course, but still I recognise a lot of these areas. The city is also a thing that is mentioned a lot by reviewers, by critics, because it feels almost like a character of its own in the film, and it really is just, it gives us this really unique feeling because we do see a lot of what goes on in post-war Vienna. So you've got black market tradings, dealings, you've got people, Viennese people, Austrian people having difficulties moving around because Vienna, if you don't know, was occupied by the four liberating forces of the Second World War. So Vienna was quartered in that sense, and you had a Russian quarter, a British one, a French one, and an American one. And we also see the army personnel interacting with each other. So we're reminded of all of these things that took place in Vienna. So it feels very real in that sense. You know, it really puts you in the shoes of the people who lived back then. So that is really wonderful. Also, how it's shown, and the film is known for its use of Dutch angles, so we very often, you know, the camera is tilted to give us a sort of strange angle, I call it, but it absolutely works. We get a feeling, you know, that we're getting lost in this city because we are sort of, you know, traversing the bowels of it in a sense, even down to the sewers. And you know, just the way it's shot is really masterful. By now I've really taken a liking to black and white films because I feel like, in a way, colour sometimes really distracts us from what's important or what's actually more appealing, you know. And here it's really great because you get to see all these, I'll call them experimental shots. I suppose for them they might have been, but it really brings Vienna to life. I really enjoy that quite a lot. Now, one of the criticisms I do have is the story, because I'll say the first half of it, without spoiling it, really didn't do much for me because it felt very repetitive. You know, we're moving from one place to another and you're just following these conversations. And while there are interesting tidbits to it, because we gradually learn more about who Harry Lime is or was, and you know, how these people had relationships with him, in what way, etc. While that is interesting, it just felt like more of the same because we keep returning to the same characters, you know, and it felt very same in that sense. I like the second half of the film a lot more. It's, I can't explain why because that would be spoiling it. I just enjoy that a lot more. But that is one criticism I would have of the film. But again, like I say, that is, I don't know, that's very particular to me. I would imagine that back then films particularly were more talky, I'll call them, you know, it was more about conversations, and it's just in this case, I don't know, the dialogue just didn't captivate me. One thing the third man is known for is the music. You've got the Zither, or in German it's the Zither, because obviously there's a lot of German in this film. Speaking of German, but I'll talk about the music first. So this is a sort of plucking instrument. It's kind of like a, you know, sort of guitar-esque thing with strings, and it's used throughout the film. During my research, also the Blu-ray, if you get the Blu-ray, there's a lot of fascinating extras on there, including the making of, really interesting stuff. And so they found this musician who plays this instrument. Typically it would have been in bars and such in the evenings, and they decided to just use the music throughout the film, and it was a huge success, you know, #1 hit all over the world, and particularly in America, I think. And it is really, also again, it gives it a very unique feel. It feels great. I mean, everyone I think has heard or recognises the third man theme when they hear it, and it just fits the story so well because it's like, it's a kind of mischievous thing, and you know, Harry Lime is that kind of character. It really fits him because he's up to no good in a way, you know, and which you know, we kind of find out when people talk about him, etc. And the music fits it so well, and I really like that. It gives it a lot of personality. It really does. So the music is a great point in here. Now the German I briefly mentioned, it's particularly funny if you speak German, particularly if you're Austrian, because it's great. They do something that in the past decades has not been done so well, because they use actual Austrian people and actors to portray Austrian people in films. Now that sounds like an obvious thing, and we're gradually getting more of it again now, but I've seen a lot in past decades. I obviously know it a lot from situations where Americans or British people play Germans or Austrians, and you can tell, you know, that the accent, it's not spot on, they're not actually from these countries, and it's always a bit of a disappointment. I get you do it because it's cheaper to do, easier to do, but it's so much more satisfying when you get an actual person from that country, or at least someone who is really a fluent native speaker, you know, and it just makes it so much better. It doesn't matter if you're talking about French people or Korean people, what have you, know, it doesn't matter which country. I always like it when they try to get people who feel like they are actually from that country. And it's really funny because in this case, like, you've got one situation where there's a wee boy and they're talking about somebody being killed, and it's just so funny because they use typical Viennese slang and words, and it's just so enjoying. You know, we laughed so much, my brother and I, because we recognise these terms as well, of course, and to think that this film, which is now over 70 years old, you know, they have all these in them. Really good. So if you know German, if you know German or if you know Vienna, this film will be even more enhanced for you. The acting is flawless throughout. We have really great acting, so that is something I enjoy. The ending, not spoiling it again, The ending is something very interesting as well. It definitely doesn't end as you expect. In the last few seconds you expect something to happen, and then they pull the rug from out of you and do something different. I really enjoyed that. I do feel that this film was very inventive. It did a lot of things for the film industry, for cinema. So, you know, there's so much to like here and enjoy. You've got the great acting, the lights, etc. work so well with the city, just how they lit the whole thing, how they're showing it, the angles, the acting. Once the action picks up a bit more, you know, the city comes alive and it really turns into its own character, and it's just amazing, and obviously also a bit sad to see all this rubble that people were living in for so long, you know, after the war, just rebuilding everything. It really makes you feel for people in war-torn countries, you know, thinking right now, of course, of, for instance, the Ukraine. You know, I mean, we see all those pictures there as well. It's the same thing, and it's just crazy that we as humans then eventually just learn to live in all the rubble, etc. We really are kind of like cockroaches, aren't we? But I don't want to end on such a sad note. Like I say, this is definitely worthy of its title as a classic. If you enjoy the film and if you come to Vienna, there is actually also a third-man tour that you could go on. I myself haven't been. I'm obviously very interested now. Even my stepson has done it, so I'm lagging behind kind of in that sense, so I think I will check it out. Definitely check out this film, and yeah, it is worthy of everything that is said about it. That'll be all from me today. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe. It's the best way to support this channel. Leave a comment down below. Have you seen this classic? Do you want to? Have you been to Vienna? What do you think about all these kind of things that I mentioned? Are you interested now in seeing this film? I hope so. And especially, are there other films, particular classics, that you would recommend? Because I really don't know enough about them and I really enjoy exploring them quite a lot. I'll thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video on Flying Wiener. Take care.